morning, I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. Right now on Morning News Now, rockets and airstrikes. Overnight, yet another round of violence between Israel and Gaza, just hours after President Biden expressed support of a ceasefire. The latest from the Middle East and the mounting criticism Biden is facing on the Hill. Back on the docket, the Supreme Court will now hear arguments on a major abortion case out of Mississippi that could impact the reproductive rights guaranteed in its landmark Roe v. Wade decision. We'll dig deeper into the case. Underwater, a swath of severe weather has soaked parts of Louisiana and Texas. Up to 2 feet of rain dumping in some areas, causing flash flooding. Our own meteorologist Bill Cairns is here to take us through the aftermath and where the system is headed next. And torching the glass ceiling, women who weld, sparking passion in an industry dominated by men. We'll introduce you to a group of trailblazers lighting the way. That was kind of a you move there with that.
I approve. It's a cool story. I've seen it. It's a very cool story.
It is. It's a really neat story. We'll get to that later in the hour. But we begin, though, with the crisis in the Middle East, now entering its second week. Dozens of Israeli jets carried out airstrikes on Gaza overnight and this morning, while Hamas fired a wave of rockets toward Israel. 212 Palestinians and 10 Israelis have been killed.
President Biden is voicing his support for a ceasefire between Israelis and Hamas militants in Gaza amid mounting global and domestic pressure. NBC News special correspondent Martin Fletcher joins us from Tel Aviv in Israel. NBC.com senior White House reporter Shannon Pettypiece is with us from Washington. So, Martin, let's start with you this morning. Russian President Vladimir Putin has joined the calls for a ceasefire. So tell us, are these calls being heard? What's the latest with that?
Joe, heard but not heeded. There's a lot of pressure building up on Israel now to agree a ceasefire with Hamas. As you say, President Putin, the voices from the United Nations, European leaders, President Biden as well. But the political sources I have here have told me that they're feeling the pressure from the United States, which is really the only pressure that counts here. But it's not what they call, quote, heavy pressure. So Israel's still feeling that they've got the green light to go ahead to continue with their attacks on those targets, that list of targets that they have in Gaza. At the same time, Gazan rockets flying into Israel. The change today, I would say, is for the second time, rockets were fired from Lebanon into Israel, into northern Israel. 6 rockets were fired. Apparently, they didn't reach Israel. They all landed inside Lebanon, but Israel responded with artillery fire against the sources of those rockets. And that's the fear, that if there's no ceasefire, the longer the fighting continues, the more potential there is for the fighting to spread. So that's why the calls for ceasefire are growing in urgency, Joe.
Martin, you've covered this region for a long time. Is this latest round of violence different from what you've witnessed before?
I think it's very much more intense. There's a lot of rockets being fired from Gaza very suddenly. I mean, in 8 days, there's been 3,300 rockets fired into Israel from Gaza, whereas in the last round of fighting in 2014, there were about 4,500 rockets fired in 7 weeks. So there's a huge change in the intensity of the firing, and Israel's attacks against Gaza also are more intense than they were in past rounds. And of course, to that you have to add the fact that there's been intense fighting between Israeli Arabs and Israeli Jews. Now that is completely new for the various rounds of fighting, and that is going to be much harder for the Israelis to deal with when the fighting in Gaza stops. Then they're going to have to deal with the issue about the troubles between Israeli Arabs and Israeli Jews.
Shannon, let's bring you in here. So we mentioned President Biden saying that support for ceasefire. That came in a phone conversation with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. What else did he say? What else happened on that call?
Well, you heard Martin there saying pressure is coming from the U.S., but not heavy pressure. And I think that's reflected in the statements that we're seeing from the White House. This is what the White House said about that call yesterday. They said that the president expressed his support for a ceasefire and discussed U.S. engagement with Egypt and other partners towards the end. The two leaders agreed that they and their teams would remain in close touch. So saying they support a ceasefire, but not pushing or encouraging or calling for a ceasefire. We also heard from the Secretary of State yesterday, and here's what he had to say.
We are ready to lend support if the parties seek a ceasefire. We'll continue to conduct intensive diplomacy to bring this current cycle of violence to an end. Then we will immediately resume the vital work of making real the vision of Israel and a Palestinian state existing peacefully, side by side, with people from all communities able to live in dignity.
Now, the president doesn't have any scheduled remarks today on this, but he will be traveling with reporters, so certainly something we expect him to be pressed on more today.
So, Shannon, also, it took a while for President Biden to back this ceasefire. We've seen Tony Blinken there never really come out and say that he himself would support it, just saying if those parties did, we would support. Why is that, and how much of that has been down to pressure from members of his own party that President Biden did eventually come out and support that?
Well, I mean, to your point, Savannah, this is the third phone call the president has had with Netanyahu that we know of, I will say. And this is the first time we have seen mention of a ceasefire in one of those phone calls. The White House says that there is a lot of, quote, quiet diplomacy going on behind the scenes, that what they are saying in public is meant to calm and ease the tensions. But there is a lot happening behind the scenes that we aren't seeing. But of course, you mentioned that is not enough from Democrats, dozens of them calling on the president to step up his actions.
And Shannon, although the Biden administration is supporting a ceasefire, it has stopped short of calling for an immediate end to hostilities, even blocking a UN Security Council statement on the matter. Are there worries that the White House is sending mixed messages right now?
Yeah, and that is one of the concerns we have heard from Democrats, of course. The White House certainly trying to walk a fine diplomatic line here between supporting Israel and wanting to call for peace in the region. But that is going to be a tension that's going to play out here in Washington, of course, as it plays out over there in Israel.
All right, Shannon, Martin, thank you both so much.
The global battle against the coronavirus is getting a boost from the United States. President Biden now says his administration will send 20 million doses of federally approved COVID vaccines overseas in June. It's the first time he has pledged to give away doses that could be used in America. NBC News Now correspondent Isa Gutierrez joins us now. So, Isa, the U.S. has been facing pressure to step up its role in the global response. What did President Biden say about this decision to help out?
Good morning, Joe. So President Biden says that the vaccination program in the U.S. has led the rest of the world and that now it's time for the U.S. to help the world. Take a listen.
We know America will never be fully safe until the pandemic that's raging globally is under control. No oceans wide enough, no walls high enough to keep us safe. Rampant disease and death in other countries can destabilize them, those countries, and pose a risk to us as well.
Now, those 20 million U.S.-approved vaccine doses are in addition to the 60 million AstraZeneca doses that Biden had already previously committed. So in the coming few weeks, we can expect to see 80 million doses being shared with the rest of the world. Joe?
Isa, we're now seeing more states react to the CDC's new mask guidance on fully vaccinated people. It's a bit of a patchwork. Are most planning to follow those recommendations right away? And those that aren't, what are they saying about it?
Yeah, Joe. So most states are following suit with this guidance. So let's talk about New York first as an example, where on Wednesday, mask and social distancing mandates for the fully vaccinated will be lifted. Now, in accordance with the new guidelines, masks will still be required on public transit and nursing homes and homeless shelters, correctional facilities, schools, and healthcare facilities across the state. Now, on the West Coast in California, people still have to wear a mask until the state reopens on June 15th, and those who are unvaccinated will still be required to wear a mask when the social distancing isn't possible. Now, in New Jersey, the outdoor mask mandate is lifted, but Governor Murphy says the indoor mask mandate in public spaces isn't going anywhere for now until more people get vaccinated. I wanted to talk about New Jersey because this makes that state one of the few states to explicitly not adopt the CDC's new guidance on indoor masks. Here's what Governor Murphy said.
The majority of New Jerseyans are still unvaccinated, and we're not checking anyone's vaccine status at the door when you go to the supermarket or to a hardware store, for instance. I don't know how we can expect workers to be able to tell who is vaccinated from who isn't. and it is unfair to put the burden on business owners and frontline employees to police every patron.
So we're hearing from him again, that concern, that confusion that we've been hearing over the last few days from experts, from others across the country. How do you make sure that those who are unvaccinated don't also shed their masks indoors? Joe?
Isa, let's talk a little more about New Jersey. The state says it's ditching remote learning for the fall. Now, at this moment, not all kids are eligible for the vaccine yet. Maybe that'll change later this summer, but why are they making that decision right now?
Sure. So, Joe, when Governor Murphy talked about this decision, he pointed to a few things. First of all, he pointed to the fact that the rate of infection of COVID-19 in New Jersey has been declining over the last few weeks. He also talked about how adults in Jersey, as well as children as young as 12 years old, can be vaccinated. And he said that it's possible that by September, when schools open up again, children even younger than 12 years old will also be eligible to get the vaccine. Now, the state did clarify that some schools will offer remote options only when there are localized outbreaks or emergencies. But overall, if a school is open for operation, parents will not have the option to opt out of that in-person learning. Joe?
No doubt kids and parents probably all over the country hoping to ditch that remote learning by the fall. Thanks so much, Isa.
Let's stay on that topic and bring in Dr. Amish Adalja. He's a senior scholar at the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security. Good morning. Thanks for being with us, Doctor. So let's stay on school here and talk about it in the fall. So most kids won't be vaccinated, but what is their risk for COVID when they return to the classroom? I mean, we've heard Dr. Anthony Fauci even months ago say we can do this safely, get kids back into the classroom. What does this look like? Can we do it?
We definitely can do it, and I think it has to be an absolute necessity. Schools should be open now in the United States for full-time learning, and I think in the fall there really should be no barrier to that. We'll have some proportion of the student population vaccinated, we'll have teachers vaccinated, and we know even in the unvaccinated era that schooling could be done safely if you put into place social distancing and masking policies, if you are really aggressive with extracurricular activities. People weren't getting infected in schools sitting at their desks. It was when they were going to sports or cheerleading or clubs or having clandestine homecoming dances in people's basements and garage. That's where the transmission was occurring. And I think we can do this safe. It has to be a priority. Children have suffered throughout this pandemic.
And you would say, though, that those children under 12 back in classrooms should be masked?
Right now, yes, I do think that they should be masked until we get more data. If the school is completely vaccinated and transmission is down in the fall, there may be some flexibility to do that. Right now, that group is not going to be vaccinated, and there is going to be some level of transmission risk. And our best practices in schools do include having children, the unvaccinated children, masked. And I think that's something we'll have to see evolve based on community transmission. I think they will eventually go away, but right now I think we probably will see that in at least the unvaccinated children.
Doctor, let's talk through some more of this new guidance on masks. So the CDC says if you are immunocompromised and vaccinated, you should still consider wearing a mask. So let's take something like asthma. Somebody suffers from asthma, but they're fully vaccinated. What's their risk of getting the virus and having symptoms, having a severe case? And will the vaccine eventually mean for them that they can return to life without a mask?
For someone with asthma, for the most part, if they're fully vaccinated, they're going to be highly unlikely to have severe disease, highly unlikely to be a spreader. When we use the word immunocompromised, it usually means people that are on high doses of immune suppressing medication, so high doses of steroids, which most asthmatics are not on. But there are some people with autoimmune diseases that take high doses of steroids, other drugs that suppress their immune system, people who've had a transplant, people who are on cancer chemotherapy. That's really what we mean by those immunocompromised patients. And it does look like, when you look at the clinical data, you might see lower antibody levels in those individuals when they get vaccinated. But the clinical data doesn't show that they're getting severe breakthrough infections. And also remember that there are T cells that are not talked about so much because they're hard to measure, harder to explain. Those also are really important in immunocompromised people, even if they might have a lower antibody response to the vaccine.
All right, Dr. Adalja, as always, thanks for joining us.
The Supreme Court is set to take up a major abortion case, one that could have the biggest impact on reproductive rights since Roe versus Wade. The Mississippi law at the center of the case passed in 2018 and is a direct challenge to the landmark 1973 ruling. Roe v. Wade established that states cannot ban abortions before a fetus is viable, which is thought to be about 23 weeks. The Mississippi law in question bans almost all abortions after 15 weeks. Abortion rights opponents are hoping this could be their breakthrough case after Trump appointee Amy Coney Barrett replaced the late Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg last year. NBC News legal analyst Danny Ceballos joins us now to take a closer look at this. So, Danny, let's start with the law itself. What is the argument that the Mississippi lawmakers are making in their defense of this law?
Really what this case is about is they are asking the court, at least the state of Mississippi is, to take another look at a case that is generally considered binding precedent. And the reality here is that the traditional things that the Supreme Court looks for to take on a case, which is a circuit split, a division of opinion in the United States among the courts, is not there. The law is uniform throughout the country. Instead, what Mississippi is challenging is the squishiness of things like undue burden and viability, these subjective-ish tests for abortion that both sides of the argument have conceded make the abortion cases, or at least Roe and its progeny, stand on shaky ground.
So, Danny, we know the Supreme Court currently has 6 conservative-leaning justices, 3 liberal-leaning justices, the most conservative court we've seen in a while. Given that divide, just how significant is this case?
It is, but we only really know for sure the opinions or which way certain justices are leaning. And that's Clarence Thomas, who you see up there, and then 3 of the decidedly liberal justices. We really don't have a firm answer on especially the 3 newest justices, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett. Although you might infer that they would be hostile to abortion, they have also at different times, Amy Coney Barrett especially, has expressed respect for precedent. And Roe's been around for decades. And because Americans have come to rely on it, that means that gives it value, even if those justices believe that the underlying rationale, the logic, is flawed.
Danny, how are both abortion rights supporters and opponents reacting to the Supreme Court's decision to even take up this case?
This could be the biggest abortion case in a long time, because if the court decides to reevaluate the viability and undue burden standards, which are admittedly difficult to pin down, and viability is even harder to pin down because as technology advances, the ability of a fetus to live outside the womb is only getting better and better. In other words, viability keeps getting pushed earlier and earlier, closer to conception. So viability may mean something different today than it meant back in the Roe days when viability became a part of our legal landscape.
All right, Danny Ceballos, thanks for helping us understand the arguments in this case. We appreciate it.
Pressure could be mounting on Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz after one of his associates pleaded guilty to federal charges, including the sex trafficking of a minor. NBC's Carrie Sanders has the story.
Well, good morning, Joe and Savannah. Joel Greenberg, the former tax collector here in Florida, is now waking up in federal detention in a jail cell after pleading guilty to 6 charges in the indictment, including sex trafficking of a minor. That's the biggest part of all of this, because the authorities are now trying to determine if there were other people who participated in having sex with this underage girl, a 17-year-old. In the plea agreement that was signed by Joel Greenberg, it says one individual who Greenberg paid for commercial sex acts was a minor under the age of 18. Greenberg paid her to engage in commercial sex acts with him and others. The question is, who are those others? The attorney representing Joel Greenberg, I read him that exact quote. Let's listen to, once again, the quote and what his attorney had to say. In an Orlando federal courtroom, former Florida tax collector Joel Greenberg pled guilty to 6 federal charges, including sex trafficking of a child. The 37-year-old admitted to having sex with a 17-year-old on several occasions and said others did too. Among Greenberg's close friends, Florida Representative Matt Gaetz. In March, the New York Times reported federal investigators were looking into whether Gaetz paid for and had sex with a 17-year-old. The Florida Republican has repeatedly denied those allegations allegations and has not been charged with a crime. This weekend telling Republican supporters,
I am being falsely accused of exchanging money for naughty favors.
Greenberg faces at least 12 years in prison and says he agrees to cooperate fully in the investigation and prosecution of others. His defense attorney today.
In the statement of facts here, it says that Greenberg paid her to engage in commercial sex acts with him and others. Who could those others be?
I'm not going to answer that.
Will investigators continuing this ongoing probe find out who those others were? Well, that is likely because as part of this plea agreement, Joel Greenberg has agreed to not only name names, but to testify. So we may eventually find out who those others are. It's important to note that Matt Gaetz, a close friend of Joel Greenberg's, has denied ever paying for sex, for having sex with any underage girls. He continues to deny that. So at this point, while there is a lot of attention to Matt Gaetz, in fact, flying over the courthouse, there was a banner plane that said TikTok Matt Gaetz. All of that is peripheral at this point. There are no charges. And very important to note, in the plea agreement, there's no mention of Matt Gaetz's name. Guys, back to you.
Time for a check on your morning news now weather with Bill Cairns. Hey, Bill, good morning.
Hey, good morning. We mentioned it yesterday that things could get ugly this week, and it didn't take long. I mean, the pictures yesterday out of Lake Charles, Louisiana were just horrific. The flooding situation there, I mean, it was just coming down. I mean, it looked like a hurricane was coming through at one point. We had 12 inches of rain in Lake Charles yesterday. One spot in Texas picked up 18 inches of rain in the last 2 days. The amount of water that's been coming out of the sky along the Texas-Louisiana border has been ridiculous. There's water everywhere, and a lot of flash flooding, obviously, because we've had homes that have been flooded, people that have been rescued from vehicles, you name it. Thankfully, though, I haven't heard of any fatalities. But just think about Lake Charles. 2 hurricanes last year and then a flash flood emergency yesterday. So in the one calendar year, they've had just 3 horrific weather events. You got to feel for them. All right, so what are we dealing with right now? We have flash flood warnings around New Orleans. We've got a thunderstorm complex that's just sitting there. We have another one out towards San Angelo that's producing the potential for some large hail. So, you know, even in the early morning hours, we're still dealing with it. Where you see the maroon colors is where we had the flash flood warnings. You can see that near the dot there near New Orleans, one spot near Little Rock, and then a bunch of spots out near Abilene. In all, 33 million people at risk of flash flooding. This is the additional rainfall through the rest of this work week through Friday. Another 3 to 5 inches widespread from Dallas to Houston, including Lake Charles once again, to Shreveport to New Orleans. And on top of that, we could even get some severe weather out of this today with 12 million people at risk, a damaging wind, large hail, and maybe even a few tornadoes. We had 20 tornadoes reported yesterday. Thankfully, none of them hit anything, so they were all out over the rural farmland, not affecting anyone. With all that said, guys, with all that negativity I just threw at you, we do have another gorgeous day on the eastern seaboard. It was absolutely incredibly beautiful yesterday, and that continues today.
A lot to watch there down in the south, though. Thanks for walking us through it, Bill, and we will see you next hour. Coming up, President Biden heads to Michigan today. The backdrop, a Ford plant in Dearborn. We'll tell you about his administration's latest push for America to go electric. Up next. America's best-selling vehicle is going green. Ford's iconic F-Series trucks sold around 90 pickups every hour in 2020, even despite the pandemic. Starting tomorrow, an all-electric version will be unveiled, and President Biden is getting a sneak preview today in Dearborn, Michigan. NBC News correspondent Josh Letterman joins us now from D.C. He covers climate policy in the nation's capital. Josh, good morning. So, I mean, this F-Series pickup truck, I mean, it can't be overstated how popular it is. It was America's best-selling vehicle for the 39th straight year in 2020. It's also the industry's top-selling truck for 44 consecutive years. I mean, this one single vehicle has such a serious economic impact. And I think what's really cool about this is that if we're trying to get towards green cars, it's got to be stuff like this. It's got to be the cars people actually want, not just the Teslas and the Priuses. There has to be more options. So tell us about this and what the president's goal is today with making a visit here.
Well, you hit the nail on the head, Savannah. Americans love their pickup trucks. And one of the top reasons Americans cite about their reluctance to embrace electric vehicles is that they want options that fit their specific lifestyle, be it room in the back seat for 3 kids and the family dog, or a flatbed in the back to schlep their equipment to work. Up until now, Americans really haven't had a whole lot of options. The electric vehicle market has basically been a whole lot of fairly standard sedans. But now with dozens of new models being rolled out, not only by Ford, but also companies like GM that's going to be rolling out an all-electric Hummer from GMC. Americans are starting to be able to fit electric vehicles into their particular lifestyle. And that's what we expect to hear from President Biden this afternoon when he visits Dearborn, Michigan, to this Ford facility that will be unveiling tomorrow the new Ford electric F-150.
And Josh, while we have you, I'm going to ask you to take off your climate hat, put back on your politics hat. There's some breaking political news this morning. NBC News has now confirmed that Rudy Giuliani's son, Andrew, will be running for governor in New York State, challenging Cuomo. What are the details here?
Well, Andrew Giuliani has never run for elected office before, but he says he's ready for the job. And in fact, he did work for 4 years in the Trump White House. Now, he will be squaring off in the Republican primary with Rep. Lee Zeldin, a congressman from Long Island, who is also a very close supporter of President Trump. And if Andrew Giuliani emerges victorious from that primary, it sets up the prospect of a Giuliani and a Cuomo on the same ballot in this election, Savannah.
All right, Josh Letterman, thank you so much. Let's now look at what's making news around the world this morning. NBC News foreign correspondent Claudio Lavanga joins us from Rome. Good morning, Claudio.
Good morning, Savannah. Well, a massive rescue operation is underway in India in an attempt to rescue hundreds of people from 2 barges who got into trouble after a deadly cyclone hit the coast of the country there. Now, 177 people have already been rescued by the Indian Navy out of a total of 400 people who got stuck on those barges when one sunk and another one went adrift when the cyclone struck. Now, the cyclone with winds of 130 miles per hour is the strongest storm to hit that country in 2 decades. 16 people have already been killed. But in South Africa now, we're moving there, where Desmond Tutu, the icon of the anti-apartheid movement, has received his first coronavirus jab and has urged all South Africans to do exactly the same. South Africa is the country that was hit the hardest in Africa by the pandemic, and also the vaccination campaign there was marred by massive delays. Now authorities hope that the example set by the 89-year-old Nobel Peace Prize will inspire others to get vaccinated as well. And here in Italy, well, the country is welcoming back the world, or at least people traveling from the European Union, the UK and Israel for now, who, starting from yesterday, can skip the quarantine if they can prove they either received a vaccination or they tested negative in the last 48 hours or they recovered recently from coronavirus. Now, the authorities say they want to extend these new rules to Americans as well. But don't worry, there's no difference whether you come tomorrow or next week or in a year's time. There's a reason why Rome is called the Eternal City. It will always look like this.
Claudio, I can't wait to get there. Oh, look at your beautiful shot. Every time you're with us, we are so jealous.
You can anchor the show from the ruins.
Oh,
not talking about me, about Rome.
Claudio, good to see you. Thanks so much. Hopefully see you soon there.
Yeah.
Coming up, one of the largest media businesses in the country has just been created thanks to a blockbuster merger. We'll dig into how that affects what you can stream up next. AT&T announced Monday that Warner Media and Discovery will merge, creating one of the country's largest media companies. This new media juggernaut will include CNN and HBO, HGTV, Animal Planet and Food Network, housing hits like Game of Thrones, Cake Boss, and the franchise DC Comics all under one roof. NBC News senior media reporter Dylan Byers joins us now. Dylan, good morning. So just kind of walk us through first, set the scene for us what happened here. We know AT&T bought Time Warner back in 2016 for $109 billion. But now we're hearing these 3 names, AT&T, Warner, Discovery. Tell us what this company is going to look like.
Sure. You know, when AT&T bought what was then Time Warner and turned it into Warner Media, it was a bet that somehow by integrating media into a telecommunications business, it could set itself apart from its rivals, Verizon, T-Mobile, Sprint. That didn't work. And what you effectively have here from AT&T is an admission of defeat and a decision to go back to focusing on its telecommunications business, on its wireless business, on the expansion of 5G, and basically getting itself out of the media game. With Discovery, what you have is an opportunity to basically scale up and get bigger, which is really the name of the game now for all media companies in a landscape that is no longer dominated by the old Hollywood studios, but is instead dominated by the likes of Netflix, Amazon, and then one old player, Disney. And so if you're looking for that scale right now, it's really sink or swim. And Discovery really pulled off a coup here by aligning itself with Warner Media and getting bigger and now being on better footing to compete.
And Dylan, one of the real ways that this is going to matter to Americans is, what does it mean in my living room? What does this mean for streaming? Tell us how it impacts the streaming wars.
Yeah, look, right out of the gate, not at all. And in fact, this deal probably won't close for at least another year. But what it does point to is a future in which we have less streaming services to choose from. I think the average consumer right now is sort of inundated with all of these different streaming services, doesn't always know where to find the shows that they want to watch. You're going to have two big streaming services consolidate here. There's going to be more competition from other media firms, more consolidation. And you're getting towards a world where eventually, instead of having 12 or 15 streaming services to choose from, we go back to maybe having 5, 6, 7 streaming services to choose from. And that on the whole will be better for the consumer. You're going to have more great shows, more great content on one streaming service. And I think it'll be easier to make that choice and certainly easier to justify, the hit on the wallet.
Dylan, last night I was being lazy and I didn't want to get up to go across the room to get my cell phone to Google what streaming platform a show I wanted to watch was on. And I went through Netflix, Hulu. I couldn't remember my HBO password. I'm like, geez, Louise. So that sounds nice.
It's exhausting.
All right, Dylan, thanks so much.
Thank you.
This week, NBC Nightly News anchor Lester Holt is traveling across America to see how the nation is reemerging from the pandemic. His first stop, Orlando, Florida, where things are looking more positive for the city's tourism industry.
Savannah and Joe, our journey to witness America's rebound started here in Orlando, where many resorts and parks that shape a $75 billion tourism industry are helping lead this region's recovery. Fun fuels Orlando's economic engine. And lately, from its restaurants to its iconic amusement parks, there's more to smile about.
I will have so much fun on this summer.
Orlando's Legoland was the first of the city's major theme parks to reopen last summer. Back then, operating at 50% capacity.
There's reminders literally everywhere in the park to remind people to be as safe as possible.
Is this your first vacation since the pandemic?
Yes.
Today, Legoland does not require masks outdoors, just indoors and on rides. Do you see a lot of pent-up demand as you look at your summer schedule?
Of course. We are seeing lots of families come back.
Legoland President Rex Jackson says not only has the park welcomed back all its employees, it recently held this job fair.
We are currently hiring for hundreds of open positions.
Is there a point that you were all holding your breath, wondering which way this was going to tip?
I think that last summer was a nice tipping point for us because we were able to reopen.
But while tourism is sailing along here, still left parked at the dock is the cruise industry. We headed out to nearby Port Canaveral, where the Carnival ship Liberty is tied up. This brand new terminal still empty. The entire industry held in limbo by the CDC, whose restrictions kept us from going on board. So we spoke to Captain Renato Bendinelli by Zoom from the dock. Are you getting impatient to get back to cruises?
We are really, really ready to resume, yes.
What do you say to those who may be anxious about getting on a cruise?
Well, we shall never bring anybody to an unsafe place. We are taking all the necessary steps to guarantee the safety of everybody on board.
Some of the earliest COVID outbreaks occurred on cruise ships. Recently, the CDC said if nearly all employees and passengers are vaccinated, cruises from the U.S. can resume in July.
There's no mandate for any other business to have that requirement. We wouldn't be able to have kids under 12 on board.
Is it your expectation you will be ready and that you will be allowed to sail in July?
we're working towards that. President Biden said he wants to reopen America by the 4th of July, and we want to make sure that the cruise industry can be part of that reopening.
Christine Duffy is Carnival's president.
The silver lining for our industry and all of this and the Carnival Cruise Line is the pent-up demand that we have seen. Cruises are typically booked at least a year out. Our bookings for 2022 right now exceed the bookings that we had back in 2019 at the same time.
But living in the shadow of the major tourism machines here, small businesses like Jennifer and Fernando Tamayo's Tamale Company.
This is a family recipe?
This is a family recipe. It's a mix of my grandmother and my husband's grandmother's recipe.
They're only slowly getting back on their feet.
We were scared that in the blink of an eye we're going to lose all of our passion, you know?
Do you feel like things are getting close to normal again?
I think it's going to take a little bit longer for people to come out.
Florida's economy got a major boost last fall, lifting restrictions earlier than most states, allowing restaurants and bars to open at full capacity.
Every business has the right to operate.
Today, at family-run High Tide Harry's Seafood Restaurant,
how you guys doing tonight?
Brendan Heretic's big worry is finding enough employees. He blames new, more generous unemployment benefits.
The fact that people can make money without working seems like it will always trump, having to work for that same money.
Still, a region hugely dependent on visitors, now as hopeful as ever.
I hope for the future of Orlando is that we start to get back to normal and people come back to the city that they know and love and get back to normalcy as we know it.
Coming up, more checks are going out to tens of millions of Americans, this time for a child tax credit. And our own Stephanie Rule is physically here with us to break down the numbers. Millions of Americans are set to receive another round of checks from President Biden's massive coronavirus stimulus bill. This time, it's for child tax credit. Families who qualify should expect payments starting in July. Here's President Biden at the White House yesterday.
I'm announcing today that on July 15th, and the 15th of every month thereafter throughout the year, you will get deposited in your bank account half of your tax cut, at least $250 per child each month, a direct deposit into your account. Experts have told us this will cut child poverty in America in half.
NBC News senior business correspondent Stephanie Rule joins us now on set. Steph, good morning.
So
Look how close we are, too.
I know,
this
I'm like,
so
we're
much
here
fun.
next to each other.
I know, right? Okay, so just start with breaking these numbers down for us. It sounds like a lot of money for families.
It is, but let's start with, we currently have a child tax credit as part of the tax system, right? People did their taxes just yesterday. And when you file your taxes, you note that you have kids and you get a credit for it. Here's the problem with that. For the poorest Americans out there who don't make enough money, they don't even file their taxes. So even though they should get this money, they never get it. And that's who needs it the most. So what we're seeing here is a shift that now the tax credit will be refundable and expanded. Expanded, so that means more money. So if you have children 6 years old or under, that's going to be $300 a month. From the ages 6 to 18, it's $250 a month. Now, it phases out. So you have to be a family that earns $150,000 or less. But now that it's going to come as a monthly payment, it's almost like a kid allowance.
Okay. And also, we heard President Biden there say that this will cut child poverty in half. Is that true?
We've actually heard that from a number of research facilities. Columbia Poverty Center says at least 40, possibly 50%. You're going to see child poverty cut. That's 88% of kids in this country. And with a boost like that, with getting that monthly check, think about all the kids we've talked about, even in the last year, who are food insecure. That's going to put food on the table. And when a kid goes to school with a full belly, they do a lot better in school.
Absolutely. And one follow-up question just to this money being added here to the economy is, we've talked a lot about how there have been quite a few checks. There are supplements right now to unemployment. People are raising questions. Is that why the unemployment numbers are remaining low, or excuse me, are remaining high? People aren't going back to work. Does this check coming into the economy enter that conversation at all?
Listen, people who are going to be anti-President Biden's plans are going to make that argument no matter what. If you give people a check, they are not going to go to work. There's no evidence of that. And here especially, even if you didn't expand it, raise the amount of money, people are already owed this money. This is just a shift in the way they receive it. So are people going to argue if people get the money, they're not going to go to work? Sure, they're going to make that argument. But remember, one of the reasons we're seeing a delay in people returning to work, it takes time. We don't have childcare sorted in this country yet. Not everybody has themselves organized. And also this idea that people aren't going back to work, they are. They just might not be going back to work in the jobs they used to be in. If you had a low-wage service industry job where you had to work for tips, or during the pandemic, you got a job at a warehouse where we know millions of Americans did, those jobs pay health care. They pay $16 an hour to start. So instead of people saying there's a labor shortage, we've really seen a labor shift, and this shortage will likely work itself out. They weren't filing their taxes because they didn't make enough money. This is now just getting the money in the hands of the people it was intended for.
And quickly, Steph, you mentioned yesterday was tax day. We saw the president and vice president's tax returns. What'd they pay in taxes?
Well, we know that President Biden and First Lady Jill Biden made about $600,000, mostly from pensions, from when he was a senator, from when he was the vice president. They paid about $157,000 in taxes. That's 25%. That's more than the average American. The average American pays about 14%. Vice President Kamala Harris and her husband made about $1.7 million total. They paid $600,000 in taxes. That's 36%. So that's kind of well above the average. And what we know from both of them is we've actually seen their tax returns. And, this was a little bit of a jab from the White House. They said it was a nearly uninterrupted tradition for the White House to show their taxes, a jab at former President Trump, who, as we know, never showed his taxes.
Nearly uninterrupted.
Nearly uninterrupted.
Stephanie Ruhle, thank you. So fun to have you here.
Good to be here.
Now to 3 women breaking the glass ceiling, or torching it to be more accurate. NBC News senior investigative correspondent Cynthia McFadden has more on this extraordinary group of pioneers in Detroit.
I just like to get dirty. I like having something to prove. I like being with the guys.
Tia Leonard has landed her dream job.
Are you good at it? I'm very good at what I do.
Lily Klein looks forward to punching in.
I've always enjoyed making things.
And Bailey Steele rarely gets stressed out at the office.
It's like meditation. You can just be quiet and breathe and do your thing.
This is what sparks their passion. Welding. Often seen as a man's job, these young women are torching that old glass ceiling.
On the production line, Rosie the Riveter steps in when the draftees step out.
80 years ago, there were women picking up the torch, thousands of them stepping up during World War II. But when the men returned, most departed. These 3, part of a new generation.
Only about 4% of welders right now are female. You are pioneers, all of you. When you were a kid, was this something you ever thought you might do?
God, no. I didn't think it was a woman's job because you don't see any women welders on TV or anywhere.
We talked with these trailblazers at Gaetz, a custom furniture shop outside Detroit, where a lot of welding takes place. The only bathroom on the shop floor, a reminder of who mostly works in these jobs.
Do you feel that when you're first on the job, men tend to underestimate you and your abilities?
Absolutely.
Of course, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, all of you?
Mm-hmm. They tend to, oh, silly girl, you, or let's just keep you here.
But underestimate them at your peril. Lily makes custom furniture at this shop. Bailey is welding cells for the new county jail. And Tia helps build the elaborate ovens used to bake on car paint.
When someone hollers flash, what does that mean?
Don't look.
Don't look. Absolutely. The arc and the light from welding is very harmful.
As in, it can cause temporary blindness that can last for weeks.
I mean, it's no joke. If you don't know what you're doing, you could get really hurt.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You gotta have a couple battle scars. If you're a girly girl, this is not for you.
All 3 are graduates of a Detroit program called Women Who Weld, an intense training course with an amazing track record.
There's 100% completion rate and 100% employment. I don't know any place else in the country that can make that claim.
I graduated from the program on a Friday, and I started a job on Monday.
The not-for-profit program was started 7 years ago by Samantha Ferrugia. So far, 400 women have graduated and landed jobs in the industry.
It's pretty amazing to watch people in as short of a year really just transform their entire lives.
And Samantha's even earned a spot on InStyle's list of the 50 most badass women, right next to Betty White and Helen Mirren.
Most people who try welding for the first time kind of have the same feeling of power. To be able to take two pieces of metal and join them is just a really powerful feeling. It's hard to describe.
And something curious, even though America has lost more than 7 million manufacturing jobs since the late 1960s, the need for welders has grown, with salaries sometimes topping $100,000. But they caution, being a woman in a male-dominated world is not always easy.
And you are deemed fresh meat when you get there. There's not a lot of us, so you will get the catcalling. For me, I find that shutting it down right away really makes the difference.
What do you do?
Very politely, just I'm going to stop you right there. I said, I'll give you this day because I know this is new for you, but this is my job and I'm here for a reason. I don't want to hear it again.
Before I leave the door in the morning to go to work, I'm usually trying to be extremely cautious of the way that I'm presenting myself. You know, the last thing I want to do is become a distraction more than it already seems to be for a lot of people.
Because I'm a quiet person, I don't like to step on anybody's toes.
But when a man old enough to be her father made a pass,
I just had to step up and say, like, hey, don't do that, don't say that. That was the first time that I really stood up for myself, and I felt better for it at the end of the day.
To any girls in the audience who are listening to you, what would you say to them about the profession you've chosen?
Don't worry so much about how people are perceiving you. Don't let the judgment or questioning shrink you and your desire to be a part of it.
It's okay to want to be something that isn't the norm. You know, it's okay to want to be a welder. It's okay to be in a room full of men and know what you're doing.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.